Clint Eastwood had seen many things in his life, but nothing could prepare him for what happened next. A billionaire, known for his cold-hearted deals and ruthless ambition, suddenly revealed something so personal, so unexpected, it left Clint questioning everything he thought he knew about success. Clint had just settled into the luxurious private jet when he noticed the billionaire Richard Stanton staring intensely at a photo in his wallet. It wasn't a photo of a business deal or a fancy vacation. It was a picture of a woman holding a child. Her face radiated love, but her expression was undeniably familiar. Something about her felt too real, too raw for someone like Richard. Clint leaned in, his curiosity piqued. Richard hadn't said a word since they boarded. He was known for being a man of few words, but the sight of that photo spoke volumes. Why was this photo so important to him? What was he hiding behind that polished facade? As Clint watched, Richard's fingers gently traced the edges of the photo, almost as if trying to keep it together, like it might slip away at any moment. But Clint was no stranger to the games people played. He had spent decades in Hollywood surrounded by the best actors, but this wasn't a performance. This was real. Richard Stanton, the billionaire who had everything, was holding on to something that he clearly couldn't get back. Clint knew one thing for sure. He was about to uncover a secret that could change everything. Who was this woman, and what did she have to do with the man sitting across from him? Clint couldn't shake the feeling that this wasn't just some forgotten memory. There was something much deeper at play here. Richard looked up, meeting Clint's gaze for the first time since the flight began. "You're wondering who she is, aren't you?" Richard's voice was quiet, almost apologetic. Clint simply nodded, not wanting to interrupt but unable to hide his curiosity. Richard sighed and placed the photo face down on the seat beside him, almost like he was protecting it from something. "That's Maria," Richard said softly. "She was my mother." Clint had expected a business partner, a former lover, something tied to the billionaire's cold, calculated world. But a mother? The tenderness in Richard's voice took Clint by surprise. "She believed in me when no one else did," Richard continued, his eyes distant as if lost in a memory only he could see. "She was the one who told me I could be anything, and for a while I believed her." Clint listened, sensing the shift in the billionaire's demeanor. There was no bravado, no sharp edges in his words now. Just a man, finally facing a past he'd long buried. "But I lost her," Richard added, the final words cutting through the silence. Clint sat back, his mind racing. How did a man who built an empire lose the one person who truly mattered? Clint watched Richard closely as he spoke, the weight of his words hanging heavily between them. Losing someone is never easy, but the way Richard spoke about Maria made it clear that he hadn't just lost a mother. He had lost a piece of himself. "I never thought it would happen," Richard muttered almost to himself. "But I did it, I pushed her away." Clint's eyes narrowed. He wasn't just talking about a physical distance. There was something more, something deeper. Richard leaned back in his seat, his gaze fixed on the window as if looking for answers in the passing clouds. "I was so focused on building my empire, on making money, on making people see me as someone important, that I lost track of what really mattered." His hands clenched, and Clint could see the struggle, the regret etched across Richard's face. The man had everything, wealth, power, influence, but at what cost? Clint knew better than anyone that sometimes the things people chase leave them empty inside. Richard had built an empire, but it was a hollow one. He had pushed everyone aside, including Maria, the one person who had been his constant. "She told me once, 'You're chasing the wrong thing, Richard. Don't make the same mistake I did.'" Clint's heart sank. Maria had seen it all coming. She had known what success would cost, and yet Richard hadn't listened. Now it was too late. Richard closed his eyes, as if trying to shut out the guilt that was flooding him. "When she passed, I didn't even get to say goodbye. I was too busy trying to outdo myself, trying to make more money, more deals." Clint felt a pang of sympathy. No amount of money could bring her back. But that didn't stop Richard from blaming himself. It was clear He wasn't just grieving his mother, he was grieving his own choices. Clint was about to speak, to offer some words of comfort, but before he could, Richard continued, his voice breaking through the air. I never thought I'd feel this empty. I always thought success would fill the void, but all it's done is make it worse. The silence that followed was deafening. Richard Stanton had everything the world could offer, but all he really wanted was forgiveness, something money couldn't buy. Clint sat back, absorbing Richard's words. For a moment, there was no billionaire, no Hollywood legend, just two men in a private jet, each facing their own demons. Richard's confession had shattered the cold, untouchable image he had spent years building. Clint knew that kind of vulnerability wasn't something most people would ever show, let alone admit to. Richard, Clint finally spoke, his voice steady but filled with understanding. It's never too late to make things right. The billionaire's eyes flickered with something Clint hadn't expected. Hope. You think so? Richard's voice cracked slightly, as though the weight of those words was something he had never allowed himself to believe. Clint nodded, his face serious. People get caught up in the game, he said, but at the end of the day, it's not the empire you build that matters. It's the people you build it with, and the people you leave behind. Richard's gaze softened, and for the first time in their conversation, Clint saw a glimpse of the man Richard had once been. A man who hadn't always been consumed by power and greed, but a man who had once been driven by love, by family. I never thought I'd hear that from you, Richard muttered, almost as if he were trying to convince himself that what Clint said was possible. You've got nothing left to prove, Richard, Clint replied. What you do now, how you move forward, that's what matters. The billionaire's hand trembled as he reached for the photo again. This time, he didn't hesitate. He picked it up, staring at it for a long moment, and then carefully placed it back in his wallet as though making a silent promise to Maria. There was a shift in the air, a sense that something had changed. Richard Stanton was no longer the ruthless mogul who had climbed to the top by crushing others. Now, he was a man who had lost something precious and was finally ready to reclaim it. The jet seemed quieter now, the hum of the engines almost soothing. In the aftermath of Richard's revelation, Clint watched as Richard closed his eyes deep in thought. Perhaps this was the moment when a man who had everything realized he had nothing unless he made things right. The jet soared above the clouds in a deep silence, the kind that only follows a real conversation. Clint could sense that Richard was still processing everything that had been said. It wasn't easy to undo years of mistakes in one conversation, but Clint had seen this before. When a person finally confronts their own truth, everything changes. Richard's eyes were still closed, but his face had softened, the hardness replaced with an unfamiliar vulnerability. You know, Clint, he said quietly, I always thought I could buy my way out of anything. Power, money, influence, they were my tools, my safety net. But now I realize they were just walls. Clint glanced over at Richard, who seemed like a different man. The billionaire was no longer hiding behind his wealth. Sometimes the only way out is to face what you've avoided for so long, Clint said, his voice low and steady. But that's the hardest part. Richard exhaled slowly, staring out of the window at the vast expanse of blue beneath them. It was like he was seeing the world with new eyes. I've done terrible things, Clint, Richard whispered, almost as if confessing, to the skies. I've hurt people, used them, manipulated them all for the sake of success, but I can't undo it. Not all of it. Clint knew that feeling, when you realize you can't take back what's been done. But redemption wasn't about undoing the past. It was about changing the future. You can't undo what's happened, Richard, Clint said, his voice firm. But you can decide who you're going to be from here on out. You can make things right even if it takes time. The billionaire looked at Clint, a glimmer of something new in his eyes. Hope. Maybe it's not too late, Richard said, quietly. Maybe I can make up for some of the wrongs I've done. Clint leaned forward slightly, nodding. The first step is always the hardest, but it's also the most important. It's the one that sets everything else into motion. For the rest of the flight, neither of them spoke. It wasn't an awkward silence, though. It was the kind of silence that comes when two people understand the weight of what's been said. Richard Stanton had faced his demons, and for the first time in years, he didn't feel like he was running from them.